I am angry and afraid. When I picture legal residents, college students, professors, even people who helped the U.S. military, who are suddenly detained or turned away from our borders, anger swells within me. When I imagine children and their families desperately fleeing war-torn Syria and finally arriving on our shores seeking freedom, only to be told they are no longer welcome here, fury boils over me. And when I remember that Jews were once also turned away from America's shores, just like certain Muslims today, I grow afraid. I would guess that perhaps I'm not alone in these feelings. Yet for the first time in my life, I'm upset enough to do something about it. I have been marching. 2 weeks ago, my fiance and I traveled down to Washington, D.C. for the Women's March, and just last week, we journeyed all the way to JFK for the protests there. So I've been marching. I've been donating. But I've also been questioning. As a Jewish leader and rabbinical student, I have been questioning the Jewish voice in navigating the complexities of this world. When we face civil and political questions, how do we approach them with Jewish values and texts? How do we put aside party platforms and instead uphold our Jewish tradition? These are the questions with which I have been wrestling as I read the news and as I decide on which issues I should take action. To be sure, I recognize that discussing politics is a sticky situation. Some of you, I know, will agree with what I present tonight, and some of you might not. And there are others still for whom this is a non-issue entirely. Yet while our tradition may not always present clear-cut answers on every socio-political question, it does address them. Jewish texts are replete with laws and opinions on social policy, ranging from worker-employee relations to poverty, and even to immigrants and refugees. In other words, we must seek the guidance of our Jewish tradition as we walk the world around us in all its forms, including political crises. After all, this is also our Musar value for this week. Emunat Chachamim, faith in the sages. We as Jews must rely on our rabbis and teachers, both of the past and present, to help guide us through the modern world. So how do we do it? What does Judaism say about navigating that mishugas around us? Well, I could spout some of our social justice slogans. Justice, justice shall you pursue, proclaims the Torah. But that could really mean anything. To truly address the problems of this world, we must dig deeper. So let's do that with this issue that's been on my mind lately, and maybe it's been on yours as well. What might Judaism say about foreigners, about immigrants, about refugees who want to enter into our homeland? Let us begin with our Torah portion this week, Parashat Bo. Tucked hidden away in the triumphant escape from Egypt sits a subtle yet profound verse. Torah achat yeh la'ezrach v'lager hagar b'tochechem. There shall be one law for the citizen and for the stranger who dwells among you. This verse establishes two categories of people, a citizen and a ger. That Hebrew word, ger, translates into a few English terms, including protected foreigner, stranger, and even refugee. But who really is this ger? Do we really need to treat all strangers as if they were our own? It turns out that just like our political discourse today, Judaism also approaches this issue from the perspective of security versus humanitarianism. In fact, the medieval sage Abraham ibn Ezra notes that in our verse, a ger refers to a righteous stranger rather than an enemy. He implies that we must respect only those foreigners who are friendly or virtuous, not our enemies. Can't you hear that in the news today? Furthermore, Jewish sources repeatedly declare that we can and should ensure our own safety and protection. Rashi comments that Israelites living on frontier towns would lock their gates to keep out enemies. Rabbi Joseph Caro legislates that we may protect against foreigners who sneak in to attack us, even at the risk of violating Shabbat. Thus, we see that Judaism upholds the right to protect ourselves from foreigners. Yet, as Ibn Ezra states, we must differentiate between the enemy ger and the righteous ger. This second ger is not some enemy crouching at our borders, but rather is someone in need of our mercy. Indeed, the Bible repeatedly associates the ger with the orphan, the widow, and others who lack power and privilege. These individuals cling desperately to the bottom rung of the biblical socioeconomic ladder. Without our assistance, they would be helpless. In fact, the Torah commands us to protect the stranger no fewer than 36 times. Furthermore, the rabbis command that we must imagine that we ourselves are the ger. We must empathize with the anguish, the terror of fleeing our home toward an unknown land, or even arriving at unwelcome borders. Perhaps you've heard of the 5-year-old boy who was recently detained at Dulles International Airport because the White House claims that he may have been a terrorist threat. Hearing this story just overpowers me with emotions. I cannot imagine what he and his family had to endure. This little boy is not our enemy, but a powerless individual whom God commands us to protect. This is what our sages teach me. And so when I feel overwhelmed and I wonder what to do, I once again turn to our sages. For instance, the great American rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, when marching for civil rights in the 1960s, declared that in marching, he was praying with his feet. Then there are New York City rabbis Rachel Grantmeyer and Joel Mosbacher, who led us in Havdalah at JFK. So yes, I have been questioning the Jewish response to our hectic world, and I have found some answers. Protect the stranger. Seek justice. Pray with your feet. These are the Jewish values that I sought as I marched in DC and at JFK, and they are the values that I will once again turn to when the next crisis arises. And I invite you to turn to them as well. Of course, as I said earlier, you might disagree with me on these issues. You might find that our Jewish texts offer a different answer. Our tradition speaks in a multiplicity of voices. What's just as important, though, what's just as important as the opinions we form is how we form them. Let us come to them Jewishly, through digging deeply into our Jewish texts and identifying Jewish values. In other words, let us rely on emunat chachamim, the faith of our sages, the wisdom of our tradition. And so with that, and in light of the Israelites finding their freedom this week in our Torah portion, I will leave you with the wisdom of one last Jewish sage, whose words still burn fiercely on the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless tempest-tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. We pray silently.